Now, the U.S. is pressuring manufacturers who produce personal protective equipment to stop exporting it. 3M says a new federal order requires it to put U.S. needs ahead of other customers, specifically Canada and Latin America. That's getting a reaction from Ottawa. So let's bring in our Evan Dyer. He's been watching this for us. So, Evan, the Prime Minister got quite a few questions about this today. Has he spoken to the President about it?
No, we don't believe he has spoken to him yet directly, but he certainly was asked about the pressure on 3M, the pressure coming from Donald Trump, both in his Twitter account and also with threats to invoke the Defense Production Act, which we've already seen him do against General Motors in the United States. 3M, it must be said, is resisting it, says it wants to honor its contracts with the buyers outside of the United States, who include not only Canada, but also countries in Latin America. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did speak about this morning in his news conference, and some thought that they heard a sort of a veiled threat of retaliation in there. Let's let the viewer be the judge. But he certainly did reference this being a two-way relationship and echoed some of the words from 3M that this could cause problems for people on both sides of the border. Let's watch.
We've been working very closely with the Americans to highlight what Canadians know very, very well, that the level of integration between our economies goes both ways across the border, that we are receiving essential supplies from the United States, but the United States also receives essential supplies and products and indeed healthcare professionals from Canada every single day. I think of the thousands of nurses, for example, who cross the bridge in Windsor to work in the Detroit medical system every single day. These are things that Americans rely on, and it would be a mistake to create blockages or reduce the amount of back and forth trade of essential goods and services, including medical goods, across our border. That is the point we're making very clearly to the American administration right now.
So there you have the Prime Minister saying that this was a mistake, and the government says it has communicated that message to the U.S. administration. Of course, the Defense Production Act is a very powerful tool that the Trump administration can use to force U.S. companies to change their production, produce new materials, and dictate who they sell them to. It has been used against General Motors. It has not yet been invoked against 3M, but of course it could be. And the Defense Production Act in the United States is under this whole production ramping up of medical equipment and everything is under Peter Navarro, a White House official who has a bit of a history with Canada. We may recall that back at the time of the G7 in Canada, he was the one who was forced to apologize after saying there was a special place in hell for people like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So certainly we've seen some very aggressive actions by the U.S. administration to divert medical material to the U.S., including Germany complaining today that they basically grabbed a shipment that was in an airport in Thailand on its way to the Berlin police and diverted it to the United States. So this is becoming increasingly a heated battle to get your hands on this equipment around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So that question to the Prime Minister was, would you have a tit for tat if they stop the flow of goods? And he said, well, there's a lot of nurses that work in Michigan, for example. So could this be, for example, could this be retaliation between the two countries?
Well, I have to say, I wouldn't think that example was chosen at random. I mean, this is certainly a well-known relationship. We have a lot of medical people who work on the Michigan side of the Windsor Bridge, but live on the Canadian side. Michigan does depend quite heavily on them for its healthcare system. And Michigan is also, probably not coincidentally, a state that President Donald Trump really needs to win re-election. So indeed, there are some levers that Canada does have. Would it be willing to really pull on them and escalate this conflict? Well, our Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, seemed to imply that Canada was willing to go that way, didn't want to, but is willing to. Let's watch her.
As to the hypothetical of what would happen if it doesn't get resolved, the first step is to resolve it. But I do want to assure Canadians that our government, as has been demonstrated by our actions, is prepared to do whatever it takes to defend the national interest.
We also saw Premier Doug Ford talking about this in his news conference today and showing quite a bit of anger, actually, against President Trump for trying to do this. Let's watch him.
And I just can't stress how disappointed I am with with President Trump for making this decision. I understand. He's thinking I got to take care of my own people, but we're connected, and but even in saying that, I'm not going to rely on President Trump. I'm not going to rely on any prime minister or president or any country ever again. Our manufacturing, we're gearing up, and when those assemblies start, we aren't going to stop them.
So this is not the first COVID-related dispute between the White House and the Canadian government. Of course, already the Canadian government pushed back on Donald Trump's plan to station U.S. troops near the U.S.-Canadian border, and Canada did claim victory in that dispute. Those troops were never put in place. And there is also, of course, the issue of making masks here, and that's something where there has been some progress, it seems. There is a company in Ontario. Doug Ford said he wants to see some production there, and Woodbridge Foam in Kitchener, Ontario is currently working on making masks in conjunction with McMaster University, and is quite optimistic that it may have some online soon. But in the meantime, there's still a scramble to source this material all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Evan, thanks for keeping an eye on this. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Anna.